I see someone nodding their head. That's good. Thanks. Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit about the program, what we do, what you can expect out of the program if you're interested in taking it. In short, the programs run, the instructional periods for the program for both iOS and the Android developer run 8 weeks each. The entire classes run 16 weeks. Each one runs 16 weeks. We have 8 weeks of entirely online instruction. And in that entirely online instruction, we have a noisy iPhone. Anyway, in that period of instruction, we have weekly modules that we release once a week. The Android classes and the iOS classes, the content is released in weekly modules on Wednesday of each week through 8 weeks. There are assignments and discussions that go on during the weeks. And we have live chat conferences that we do online the last 4 weeks of the class, of the instructional period of the class. And I keep talking about the instructional period of the class because what we have after you get done with the class materials or done with my discussions or my chats, there's an additional 8 weeks at the end of the class to finish your project for the class. And the project for each class is the same. It is the construction of an app built on the knowledge that you got from studying in the materials in the class themselves. And you have up to that 8 weeks to submit the app, but the entire class is structured week by week so that you can get the skills and knowledge to actually create an app, whether it's for the Android or the iOS development environment. Now, there are a couple of differences in the development environments. The Android development environment is largely written in Java, and it uses an open source set of tools that are available as the Android Software Developers Kit, which also has a development utility, a very powerful one called Eclipse. The Eclipse environment is also Java-based, and it interfaces directly with the Android developers tool, the ADT, which allows you to use the Eclipse environment, which is an integrated development environment, and to create apps for Android without going to a command line. Now, some people, like me, are very familiar with command line functions. I'm an old Unix guy. One of the other classes that I teach here at NJIT is the Unix certification series. And I'm pretty comfortable in a command line environment, but a lot of people aren't, and there are some more powerful functions you can get in an integrated development environment like Eclipse. Eclipse is available. It's open source. You can download it right from Eclipse. The Android Software Developer Kit is also open source, and you can download that from developer.android.com. One of the differences between that and what we have in the iOS class is the tools for iOS, while they're similar to the Android tools in the way they function and how they function, one of the major difference, of course, is that the Apple stuff is not open source. It's proprietary to Apple. But in our iOS class, everyone who is enrolled in the class gets a membership in developer.apple.com, and it gives you access to all of the release materials that any commercial developer gets for the duration of the class. Actually, the memberships in developer.apple.com last for a year from the date of the start of the class. It allows you to download Apple's software development kit, download Xcode, which is their integrated desktop environment for producing apps and creating apps, and also allows you to sign a provisioning profile, which is a thing which allows you to install the apps directly on your device. So with Apple, commercially, when you have a product, you upload it to the App Store at Apple, and then you have to download it down to your device. That's not very practical for a developer. So what this does is it allows someone to be able to write some code, write an app, and deploy it immediately to their device to see if it actually works. Apple's development environment, like the Android development environment, does come with a simulator or emulator. Apple calls it a simulator, and the Android development environment calls it an emulator, which is a software version of, for Apple, an iPhone or an iPad. For Android, it's an Android device that can be simulated. So you can see how your code is going to run on a software, in a software hardware emulator. But with the Apple tools that you get from the developer.apple.com, you can actually run them on your device, which you can do with the Android tools without having to pay anything, but it's a little bit more involved sometimes to get some of the stuff installed in Android than it is on the Apple. The Apple development environment is a little bit simpler than the Android development environment, but when I say it's a little bit simpler, I mean it's a little bit simpler, not a lot. Apple uses their own proprietary language, Objective-C, to write their apps on it, which is not quite as commonly used as Java, probably not by a long shot, because Objective-C was also written to be the foundation of Mac OS X, which is, you can also use that same language to develop programs for that. Now, there's an awful lot of Java in the world. There are Java applications, there are Java servlets, there are all sorts of Java implementations, where with the sheer number, there's a lot more of those than there are Objective-C. But when you consider the amount of devices that are out there and platforms that are available to develop on, both the Objective-C environment and the iOS and the Java environment through the Android development are both pretty much very fertile fields. There's an awful lot of development going on in both places, and we know from talking to employers and people who implement code for a living, especially iOS and the Android code, is that there is a shortage of developers in both of those fields. Not only from the perspective of the proprietary code like Xcode and the Java code, which is based in Eclipse, but from the perspective of integrating the environments, which there are several tools out there which will allow you some integration between the Apple environment and the Android environment as far as writing apps. They're not, strictly speaking, cross-platform. You can't write an app in Java for an Android device and have it run on an Apple device. But the trend now is to begin writing and developing in a language called HTML5, which is completely portable between the devices, and it's browser-based. As the operating systems get more and more advanced, all the operating systems, not just iOS or the Android operating system, browsers are likely to become a lot more like operating systems than just simple browsers themselves. So, quick summary: both classes. Instructional period 8 weeks. Full period is 16 weeks. You can expect to learn enough to be able to write an app that's suitable, to run on a device. I'm not going to tell you that you're going to take a class for 8 weeks and spend another 8 weeks and be a full-blown commercial developer. That's not likely to happen in that shorter period of time. I'm sure there are very talented people who have done that. I know it took me longer, but I'm sure there are people who have done that. But it will establish the patterns and the practices to give you the tools that will allow you to pursue either a career in development, whether it's for your own personal edification, if you want to develop apps, or the other thing that we find in the class is we find that we have people who want to learn the basics and the basics of the implementation of both of those operating systems so that they can manage developers and manage people in an environment that can actually produce those kinds of programs. Before we go any further, does anybody have any questions about anything, about the program or anything? I've got my chat window open here. You can type a text chat in, and we also, for people who are watching live on YouTube, they can't be in here right now. If you have your IRC window open, we're watching that in the other in another window here. Okay, one question I have is, what programming skills do I need to take these classes? Well, programming skills to take the classes, I would tell you that there isn't much in the way of programming skill that you need. If you are an established programmer or someone who has used a Visual Studio environment or an environment that's an integrated desktop environment, the experience of having done programming might help you in transitioning to a new type of programming, but those types of languages do not directly in any way, really, interface with Objective-C. The ability to know that your brain works in such a way that you can do programming might be a help, but some of the best students we've had in these classes have had no prior programming experience at all. In fact, one of the best students I had is entire background was in music and as a musician, and his first attempt at programming anything came from learning this class. So what we do is we don't teach programming in the class per se itself. We don't teach Objective-C by itself. We don't teach just the Xcode environment by itself. We integrate those into the class materials, and along with that, for the Apple part, since you have access to developer.apple.com, you have access to the entire reference library for Apple that has some excellent tutorials, step-by-step lessons, sample code bases, and a lot of resources that you can use. On the other side of the coin, on the other side of the developer coin, where you have your Android code, you have those same types of resources. They're not all centrally located and not quite as curated as the Apple resources are, but the same types of things are available. Of course, through class and discussion, we try to pull people along and help them along through their, any programming difficulties that they have. But those things are learned inside the class. We really don't need those types of, we don't need programming knowledge coming into the class. Programming skill, the ability to do programming, is something that will certainly help. The more skillful you are at that, the more your ability to learn to do programming, the better off you'll be. But it's not a prerequisite for the class at all. Did that answer your question in a very long-winded way? Good, okay. That answered that question. Do we have, anyone else have any other questions about what we do in the class or how the class runs, or how about some essentials like how much the class costs? Each of these class, the fee is $1,050 to register for the class. The next class coming up it begins March the 27th. It's the same starting time and date for both the iOS and the Android classes. And they'll run for the 8 weeks. That'll take you sometime through the end of May. And then you'll have until sometime in late July, I think it's July the 28th actually, to actually submit the your final project app. The registration is available up to a day or two. I believe it's 2 days before the class begins. But we limit the class sizes to 10, so if anyone is interested in coming into these classes, registering a little bit early is better than registering a little too late. Oh, another very good question. Why should I spend this much money in a class I can take self-study for free? Well, that's a very good question. It depends upon how motivated the student is. The Android, especially the Android part of this, the materials that we use, since they are open source, are almost entirely available on the web. Someone who wants to spend the time to find them and go through the tutorials can probably get the same type of content that we provide in this class. But you also better have a lot of time to be able to do that, because I know what I had to do to originally write these classes, and had to go through the content that was available on the web, customize it, tailor it for a class. It is time consuming just to do that part of it before you get to any of the actual learning of the material. And having a class offered this way through we're a well-known university, that also provides at the end of the class, the successful students get certificates in completion and continuing education units and a permanent record in our banner, our student information system. It will show as a continuing transcript you've got here at NJIT. There are the credentials you get at the end of the class are one benefit, but before you get to the credentials, having a class constructed for you, having a class that's designed to teach in weekly segments, and that kind of structure can be a lot more useful if you don't have a lot of time to spend than trying to learn it all on your own. Now, I know there are some people who are great self-learners and who don't really need a very structured environment in which to learn. And for those people, learning on the web on their own is probably fine. Most people, certainly in a school, most students, we say students are here for a reason, and that they're here to get that structured learning in a structured learning environment. And our environment that we use online, we use a learning management software called Moodle, which allows classes to be conducted in such a way that we can release resources in a timely manner and have resources that are reading, that are discussion in forums that we use, which are asynchronous. Anybody can post anytime. We also have the live chats that we schedule at the end of the class. And we also have, for each class, a continuously open IRC, which is Internet Relay Chat Room, that's open all the time if students want to get together and talk about things, because there is a certain benefit, a lot of benefit to students getting together and discussing some of the things going on in a class and having questions. And we keep these IRC rooms, which are private, not accessible from the outside the class or from in the actual internet environment. They provide the ability for students to discuss amongst themselves questions, bring questions to me. I'm in the IRC when I'm in my office from time to time. It's largely used for students to gather and to discuss, but it's turned out to be a valuable resource in classes gone by. So there are certain values that we do add to this open source material that certainly an inducement to get into a class, and an encouragement. I think you'll get more out of it in a smaller structured environment, unless you are very much a self-motivated person with the time to be able to spend learning on the web. On the other side of that is the iOS. With the iOS, if you want to be access to these materials, Apple will charge an individual $99 for a year's membership in developer.apple.com, which will give you access to those resources that we use in the class too. Now, since it's more centrally located, it's a little bit easier to go through that once you've paid your fee and get into the membership of developer.apple.com. But there's a lot of material there. The resources are excellent, and it's a lot to plow through in a reasonably short period of time. Developer.apple.com offers the commercial memberships at $99 for an individual for a year, and you could easily spend a year on their site plowing through the material. The material is great, and there's an awful lot of it there. One of the other benefits of being able to use a tool like developer.apple.com, whether it's for a commercial developer or for a student in classes, you have access to the Apple developer forums where you'll be able to talk asynchronously, sometimes in real time, sometimes in a forum set up with other Apple developers, so you can know what's going on with the code, what's coming out, and features in the code, who's having problems in the code. The only thing I tell you is the student developer membership gets access to the release versions of the Apple materials. They don't allow the students to have any of the beta materials because it's considered to be an instructional exercise, and if you want to learn about something, it's better to learn off established code than learn off of code which may be buggy like some of the beta codes are. So that pretty much covers the self-study that versus commercial that I know of. Let's see, do we have any other questions? Here's a question. Does the class cover the methods of deployment to the various Apple or Play stores? Okay. If you're talking about the App Store from Apple, yes, we do. As a student, as a developer's student, Apple does not allow the student developer to submit an app directly to the App Store. What we do is for students who want to do that, it will submit through my own personal commercial account for that. And we go through all the steps with that. And with the Android apps, we do the same thing. Android apps, it's a little bit different process than what Apple has, because Apple is very highly regulated and structured manner to actually deploy apps. Google and Android and some of the other areas where you can actually deploy and download apps all have their own, I won't say idiosyncrasies, but they all have their differences in the way that they do things, and we do cover the deployment of apps to the store. Peter, that pretty much covered what you needed to know? Great, okay. All right, are there any other questions before I roll? Oh, okay. How long have you been teaching app development? Well, seems like a long, long time, but when you go back to it, it's actually, this is 4 years in January when we started the app development program. This class began as a senior project credit class that we taught in January of 2009, and taught it through that one semester as a senior project class, and it was very popular, so we immediately rolled that same content over into the non-credit class. We tailored it a little bit because the credit class actually covered 14 weeks of in-class learning, whereas what we had to do with the material for the non-credit class was cut that back to fit within an 8-week instructional period and still allow enough time for development so that we could pretty much get close to the same type of time container that a semester covers. The Android developer hasn't been quite as long. It was January of 2010 was the first time that we ran that. So that's been about 3 years for the Android developer. As far as the two classes go, the Apple class, there are more sections of that have run. It's been around for a year longer, but the classes run just about every 8 weeks year-round, and they run at the same time concurrently, and we expect them to continue right on through the not just the academic year, but the calendar year of 2013. Hooks are another question from Peter. Are there any hooks into Apple or Android applets, etc., that would be covered? Yeah, if you want to get an idea of those types of well, the hooks or the types of code that you can get into, you can take a look at the one of the books that we use now. I have the last version of the book that we use right here, not the current one. The current one just came out, and I have it, but it's at home. I'll hold it up here if you can see it. It's Beginning iOS Development. This is the actual book that we use in the class, but we use the one now that's Beginning iOS 6 Development, not 5. Beginning iOS 6 Development just came out in January of this year, so the book and the material are still quite new. All right, it's covered in here. And the other one we have is, again, this is my older book. The one we actually use for the class is Professional Android 4 Application Development. This is the older book that has 2. So the materials that are covered in here, plus some tips and tricks that I've learned and others have learned from actually doing the coding, are covered in the book. Are covered. We also talk a little bit about PhoneGap, if you're familiar with PhoneGap, and we do touch on the mobile deployment via HTML5. But as things progress and as time is moving on, the HTML5 development is actually becoming more and more of a standalone topic. It's not just apps that we're writing now. We're writing apps for the actual hardware, whether it's Android-based app or iOS-based app. But we're writing the cross-platform HTML5 content, which seems to be more popular right now with business clients. The idea of writing a web-based client that has the functionality of a locally installed client app is appealing to businesses because you don't the client doesn't have to, the client app, if there's a business or salesperson on the road, doesn't have to download all the proprietary information into the device to be able to do whatever they need to do with the numbers or to make a sale or inventory, whatever the business concern is. Because if that person accidentally loses the device, it's stolen, or something happens to it, the company's data is at risk. With the using HTML5 and the mobile browser-based apps on it, you can provide the same functionality as a client app, but the data and everything stays behind the company's firewall and on their server. so that if something happens to the phone or the device, it's no more significant than if it happened if you were using a browser and the browser was lost or broken. You wouldn't be able to access the data, but the data would have stayed where it lived, and it doesn't come out, and then you're not as at risk for a security environment. Again, a little bit long-winded, but did that answer what you were wondering, Peter, or do you have something else there? Okay, you said that covered it. Any other questions? Well, okay, we got one here. Oh, here's a question. Not sure if you should take the iOS or the Android class. What are the benefits of each? Well, personally, I think you should take them both, but that's just me. I mean, seriously, the iOS class and versus the Android class, of course, depends upon what you're interested in. Although there are some significant hardware differences. The iOS class uses Apple's software development kit, uses Apple's Xcode, uses Apple's devices, and it should be a surprise to no one, it requires a Macintosh. If you have a Windows-based PC or a Linux-based computer or Unix-based, whatever you have, you're not going to be able to run the tools that are required to do iOS development. So you would have to actually have a Mac. And right now, the recommendation, what is the minimum spec is an Apple running Lion 10.7 point, whatever it's up to, 10.7.3 I think now, or above. Probably anyone coming into the class should think about going to the newer operating system, Mountain Lion. Apple tends to stay within their operating system parameters for a year to a year and a half. So if you have something that's a late model Mac running a late model operating system, you're probably okay for a year, year and a half before you'd have to upgrade at least the software. The hardware, Apple's hardware actually goes back pretty well. It goes back 4 or 5 years. One of the computers I used to do development on was 2007, so that's 6 years. Now, as those computers get a little bit older and code gets bigger, they don't run as fast anymore. I don't really want to do any kind of commercial development on a 2007 iMac because it's a little bit slow, but it still will run the code okay. That's for the iOS. Now, for the Android part, Android and the software development kit will run on most versions of Linux. It'll run on Windows XP, Windows 7, Vista, and Mac. And I do Android development on a Mac too. So there is a little bit more flexibility in the type of hardware that you need and that you want to deploy on if you're going to be a developer and do Android. But a lot of it depends upon your interest itself. Now, like I said, if you don't have a Mac, don't take the Mac class. Even though we do offer, where I am right now, in our Mac lab here in Fenster Hall at NJIT, we offer to our non-credit professional development students lab hours here where they can come in and actually use our Macs here in the lab. But it's much better if you have daily access to your own computer and can work the code out that way, because some programming is and design is the ability to learn a new skill. Most of it is practicing that new skill once you've learned it. So having the hardware that you need to actually practice your skills on and show off your skills, write an app on, is pretty important. You don't want to have to get out of that environment, especially when you're first learning something. You don't want to be out of it for too long a period of time. It's best to be immersed in it at first, and then maybe you can get away from it a little bit later than that, but it's certainly in the early stages. And I consider this class for programming and developing to be somewhat in the early stages. We cater towards people who don't have any design experience before. And we bring them through the process and show them the way to create apps and the path to actually create commercial apps. But so much of that depends upon how much time you invest in the class and your ability to work the hardware and work the code. Android, it's a little bit more flexible. If you have, I would say, anything from a 5 or 6 year old PC which can run Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows Vista, or Linux versions. I actually also have it running on an operating system called FreeBSD on a computer that's from 2007. But that's not really, that's just something I did. That's not really a standard deployment for the Android operating system. So if you're into Macs and you have a Mac and you think you want to develop for a Mac, iOS is the way to go. If you're into other platforms or you don't have a Mac or you're more interested in the open source way of learning and the way of deploying new applications, then Android might be the way to go. But it really depends upon what you like. I think I covered the benefits, I hope. Another very good question here. Thanks, Peter. Since I don't have a Mac, how costly and possible it is to virtualize a Mac? Let me just stick with the second part of that, the possible. In the 4 years that I've been running that class, I've had several students try to use an emulator for the Mac. I have not had a student be successful. So we've put in, right in the website where we describe the class, that we do not support emulators. I haven't seen one work yet, and even though I do have some interest in it, I don't have the time to sit down and actually crunch through an emulator and see if I can get it to work. So if you're thinking about the iOS class, I really strongly suggest it's really a requirement to have a Mac itself, an emulated Mac or a virtualized Mac. I haven't seen them work yet. I would love to have a student prove me wrong, but if someone is at the risk of spending $1,000 and not being able to get anything with it because they can't make the hardware work, I'd love to see somebody make it work, but I would hate to encourage someone to put that at risk. The other thing is for Peter, there are ways to actually not virtualize a Mac, but create a Mac from PC hardware. There's some of those that are out there, and those the Macs, the Hackintosh is an older one, but there are some of the ones that actually use PC hardware and put the Macintosh operating system on. I have seen those work, even though those boxes are very difficult to upgrade and to maintain. I have seen Xcode be able to compile, Xcode run and compile, hook up those libraries and produce an actual binary, an app binary that would run. But again, it's more of a, since we're in school here, it's an academic experience. Even though it's possible to do, it doesn't really have a lot of practical benefit. And especially if you're trying to learn a new skill or improve a skill that you already have in something like iOS, I don't recommend trying to conquer one difficulty, which may be, emulated hardware, in order to learn one tool to learn another skill. It's very difficult to do at the same time. And even though I find it very interesting, I don't really recommend it. Let's see, another question. I understand that a project is due at the end of the class. How elaborate do they need to be? Okay, what we ask for in projects is the app has to be deployable on both the emulator or simulator and hardware, which means when you write it, it has to actually run on a hardware device, and it has to be testable on the simulator and the emulator, because you have to be able to tell what kind of resources it's using and make sure you're not going to drain somebody's battery. And it has to be a well-constructed app. What we're looking for is a demonstration of a minimum of three of features of the operating system, whether it's Android operating system or iOS. There are lots of features that are available, and sometimes students will fall into the trap of the really cool app and decide they want to implement 6 different things, and sometimes that doesn't work out. I'd much rather see someone shoot for the minimum and actually get it done and turn it in and be able to get the certificate at the end of the class than to have a great, cool idea that never gets finished. A typical app one that was written here in class for a train commuter was an app that used audible alarms, a timer, and GPS. And what they did was they would set a destination and a time on, this was for an iPhone, and they were commuting, one was commuting by bus and train. And when they arrived at their destination by GPS, the alarm would go off and wake them up if they needed to be, or give them some other kind of notification. Not terribly complicated, but extremely effective, and at the time it was a really good idea. Since then, there's about 15 of them have been written. But what we're looking for is something that actually works within the scope of the best practices of development. We don't want anything that's going to be using, for Apple, it's going to be using any private APIs or code that can't be documented. We want to make sure that when people are learning how to put together apps, they're doing it in a structured form that would be commercially viable if they had to sell something, or if they were involved in a developer community or employed by a larger concern or developer that expects code to be written in a certain way. Those steps are important. And what we're concerned with is teaching those steps and how that code is developed and designed so it can be effective and reproducible, so that if you do have a problem with your code, you can actually roll it back to where the problem was and rewrite it if need be. And that involves version controlling, and of course that's a part of Xcode, and also to some extent a part of the Eclipse development environment for Android. So you said at the end of the class, there's at the end of the instructional period of the class, the last 8 weeks of the class, you have up to that 8 weeks to actually complete the app that you've been working on and designed. And we go through the planning stages during the class so that when we get to the end of that 8 weeks, everyone has a proposal and a project, and many have already started working on their projects in mind, so that you know what direction you're going to be headed. And if you finish your app in 2 weeks, that's fine, you're done. You can turn that in, and you've got up to 8 weeks to actually submit it. What we find, what I found in class, is that most people will use most of the additional 8 weeks. Most of the apps that are submitted to us and classes finished are students who have gone between 6 and 8 weeks, used up between 6 and 8 weeks of the 8 weeks at the end of that class. So then, I didn't really get into how elaborate things should be, but we can talk. I talked about the actual functions that they use. I hope that was reasonably clear, anyway. Apparently, it was pretty clear. Good. Okay. Anyone else? Anyone else have any questions about the class? I think I've hit most of the high points of what we do. So. If you have any questions about development, about what we do at NJIT, or any other procedures, just shout them out. Okay. Okay. Does the class cover any integration with a website from the Android-Apple perspective? The answer to that is yes, but that's a pretty general question. Depends upon what type of integration are you looking for. Are you talking about integration where a website has a database and you're integrating your code with the database in the back end? You're talking about display items. Can you give me, Peter? Can you give me a little example of what you might be asking there, or what you might be more specifically referring to? Oh, okay, for a database, most likely. Yeah, you can use if you want to integrate with a with a website that's got a database backend. There's a couple of different things that you can use. One of the most common ones, of course, is using web services, where you can actually read and write to the database itself. The other thing that you can do is keep a local cache of your information, which is pulled from the website database. And that can be stored if it's lightweight and consumable data. If it's lightweight and volatile data, you can use core data in either of Android or iOS, which is basically a memory-based data storage. You can also use SQLite in either one, where you can have an actual SQL database where you can pull data from the remote site, keep it on the device, process it in whatever way you need on the device, and then send it back to the database behind a website. There are also functions, again, in HTML5, which allow that to be done a little more conveniently directly through a browser without having the a database backend installed all the time, because some of the browsers, the newer implementations of the browsers that are HTML5 capable, will allow local data storage inside the browser container, even on a device like an Apple device. Okay, we're not getting too many questions from IRC. Okay, what day of the week and time are the classes? Okay, that's another great question. This is an online class, so the materials are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We release the materials on Wednesdays. It's usually right around 1 p.m. on a Wednesday when the materials are released. The chats, which are synchronous, the only thing that really is synchronous in the class, meaning that you have to actually be someplace at any one particular time, are typically between 8:30 and they last an hour, between 8:30 and 9:30, week 5 through 8 of the class. For the Android classes, for this particular rotation, the Android classes are on Tuesday nights, and the iOS classes are on Thursday nights. We've split up. There used to be just Wednesday and Thursday, but since I'm teaching a third class, that chat is now on Wednesday night. So my evenings keeps me out of trouble. I'm in a lecture Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night each week. The rest of the time, the materials are available. The forums are available all the time. You post a question in the forum, it'll be read, if not immediately, then next to immediately. Sometimes the performance you get from an instructor, whether it's me or another instructor, is actually better in an online class than in a face-to-face class, because in a face-to-face class, if you have a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or a Tuesday, Thursday class, or even a one-night-a-week class, those are the only opportunities you have to actually approach the instructor, ask questions, or get help with something with an instructor if an instructor can help. In the online format, if you have a question about something or comment, something that needs to be further explained, you can post it in the forum. And in the forum, since that's read within 24 hours, most of the time within a couple of hours, unless it's the middle of the night, you get a little bit more immediate feedback from the instructor. You also will find that in the forum base, you'll not only get feedback from me. It's not just me telling everyone, it's not me dispensing knowledge to you, but the general discussion among students inside of the forum. Someone will ask a question, and maybe before I answer it, another student will answer a question, or maybe I'll have to clarify a student's position on something, or if something works or doesn't work on it. But through that discussion, it turns out to be a pretty good learning environment. So there is no time that you actually have to be in class, except for when we have the chats later in the class. But the resources here at NJIT, if you take a class and you need to use one of our labs, the Mac lab or our 170 lab, where we do some of the Android work, they're available on Fridays. And I believe it's from 10 to 4 for each room on Friday, so you do have those resources. But again, those are only if you need to be here to overcome some kind of difficulty or solve a problem, or your computer at home broke, or something like that. There isn't any particular need to be actually in attendance here at NJIT. Next question. When do the next classes start up? March 27th. Pretty sure it's March 27th. It's that Wednesday. Both the Android and the iOS classes begin that same day. They both begin at 1 p.m. that day. When we release the first week material. And you'll have a week to, when we release the week 1 material, and each week's material, there's always assignments, tasks, stuff you need to get done during, for that particular module or that particular week material. But what we do is, if it's released on Wednesday of week 1, it's not due by the next Wednesday. It's due in 2 weeks. So you actually have like 13 days to actually get the assignments in, so that by the time you're not rushed. Usually the first week is fairly easy. People get through it pretty quickly, but things get more complicated pretty quickly as the class goes on. So you're not pressed to get certain material done before the next weeks come out. We allow that 1 week of overlap between the current week and when the assignments are due, just to give everyone ample time. Most of the people who are taking these classes have full-time jobs or part-time jobs, somehow employed, or if they're unemployed and they're taking the class, their full-time job is trying to find a full-time job. So we do make some, I wouldn't say allowances. We actually, the classes are designed to allow people to have enough time to actually get stuff done. We recommend that people have about, we say that there's about 3 hours of material each week, and we recommend that people have between 12 and 15 hours to spend. The more time you spend with it, the better you are. But as far as a minimum of getting through the class, we find that for students who will perform at a level where they can complete the class and get the certification, spend between 12 and 15 hours. Other students who perform the same certification may spend a lot more time. Very few students who have earned the certification or the certificate in the class have spent less than 12 hours. It's just sort of a losing proposition. If you don't have that kind of time to spend in this class, you're best off not taking a class or waiting until you do have that kind of time to spend. Do you also teach the web mastering certificate? Yes, I do. That's what I do on, that's my Wednesday evening. Tuesday evening is Android, Wednesday evening is the webmaster, and Thursday evening is the iOS class. So I do teach that. That certificate is, the webmaster certificate is designed to be set up in a group of 3, web author, web developer, and website manager, and those classes run sequentially. So we don't really run those. The next class in that series is also starting March the 27th, but we don't recommend that people take those as individual classes. That's a track of classes where people will earn a webmaster certificate, and in that class we cover a lot of, the first class is HTML5. So we cover a lot of HTML5 and mobile app development, database integration, and then rollout on the modern web servers like Apache 2.4 and the NJIT servers. But yes, I do teach that class. I don't think you're one of my students, are you, Michelle? I don't recognize the name. All right, we've still got about 10 minutes or so to go. Does anyone else have any other questions or any comments they'd like to make? Or I'm here and I'm willing to participate. I hope you are too. Oh, okay, contact information. That's really good. I'm asked, how do I reach you after this hangout if I need to? I'll type my address into the chat window here. Okay, my email address is Kellers, Kellers, at njit.edu. And you can send an email to me there at any time. I'm always within touch of email. I'm not always near my office phone, but I think I'm surrounded by email all the time, so I'm pretty accessible that way. You can get a hold of me pretty quickly. We also, like I said, if you are doing any of the IRC chats that we use, I'm usually available. I usually monitor that, even though I'm not always in that IRC room, because I'm not always right at my desk where I can be involved in the IRC all the time, where email is a little bit, there's that word again, a little more asynchronous, where you don't have to be there at the time it's happening. You can write an email and send it and respond to it. IRC is very good because of its immediacy, but sometimes that makes it a little more difficult to participate in that all the time. Okay, does anyone else have any other questions about the class, about the apps that we create, procedures, anything like that? Another good question. Do we cover the current trends of how businesses are using apps? Yeah, we talked about that a little bit. I talked about that a few minutes ago, about how businesses are now, as businesses use apps, as the idea of BYOD, bring your own device, has come into businesses, businesses want to be able to protect their data. And we do cover some of the best practices for businesses on client application development, but we also talk about the trends in going to the HTML5 and browser-based apps where the data is kept on the server side. That's the real trend seems to be going that way. While everyone will still have the same type of client apps they have on their devices now, but ones that are specific to, say, one's employer can be deployed within a browser so that the content stays on the server side. And right now, that is an opening, a big field of development, which is just beginning right now. If one can get in on HTML5 mobile devices and the integration with the current databases on it, that's a very strong field to be in right now. Okay, Kareem asks, what kind of apps will we learn to create? Okay, we stay pretty much with productivity apps. We do also have the code samples and the tutorials on creating game apps, but we stay pretty much with utility apps because at their most basic level, utility apps show the functions of how to create the design, the interface, and how to actually implement the code to do specific functions. Whereas gaming can be a little bit more free-form, and it's a little bit more of an advanced topic. We do have gaming components in it. We actually have an HTML5 game written for the browser that we go over for the Safari browser in iOS. It also works on Android also. Basically, we're talking about utility apps, and utility apps will show features like tables, data storage, data display, GPS, location, sound, music, text messaging, and the interface all between those. Okay. Kareem, did that cover it for you? Because we have another question too. Oh, Peter was sort of defined what he was saying there. He was thinking more about how businesses are doing some things, but not necessarily the technology. Yeah, well, the practices of businesses, we can bring a little bit of that into the class, because here at NJIT, I'm one of the advisors to the Innovation Acceleration Club. And in that, we partner with the School of Management and some very, very brilliant developers here at NJIT. And we talk about the design of an app right from, not just apps, there are other things that we do in the class too, in the club too, but we get the perspective of how businesses are actually looking at apps and how they're being rolled out and how businesses are managing that type of app process. More than just, coding an app, but how businesses handle the structure of having all this the mobile ability, which is basically the ability for their data to not only go out and increase their revenues, but their ability for their data to actually walk away from them. So there is an entire management set of mind to actually between app development and app deployment from the enterprise level. So we do cover as much of that as we can. And Kareem asks, I've come across a lot of apps that require updates. We learned how to update apps as well. Yes, as a matter of fact, in week 3 of the class, we have an app that we build which displays, this is for iOS, specifically for, we do it a little bit differently for the Android, because Android has many, 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 many levels of software releases that you have to go through. For the Apple, the IP display utility that we have was written for a very old version of the software development kit that uses some utilities which are no longer present in the software development kit. So when you take that code, which built fine 2.5 years ago, and run it under the new compilers, you get all sorts of warnings and unimplemented methods. And what we do is one of the more important things that we really stress in the class is writing an app, but how to update it, because it's not always in the writing of an app that makes it successful, but it is in the rewriting it, keeping it current with the current level of software. And of course, other things, bug stomping is always a part of it. You'll find some apps that are not dependent upon an increase in the operating system version, but they'll just come with a new version because they'll have made some improvements on it. And we do cover that, how to find those resources, how to debug the app, and how to implement the new features that may be available in a newer operating system back into older code that may have deprecated or unsupported features. Okay, Michelle asks, says, I'm interested in learning about web development, and I'm in the process of researching schools and programs. Do you think the WebMaster TNG certificate is a solid enough foundation, or would you recommend an AS or BS? I have a BA of Arts, and you don't have to apologize. You're not off topic. We hear that a lot because the types of instruction that we do here, you think of college and universities, you think of the big word education. Well, sometimes there's a big difference between education and learning. And while in these classes we don't target it at education, we target it at learning, about learning a skill. Now, I'm not going to tell you that to abandon your Bachelor of Science or even an associate's degree and go out and take an 8-week course and then go out and make your way in the world. But it certainly is a supplement because we have people who haven't attended colleges taking these classes, and we have students who have graduated right from here at NJIT coming back to take these classes. Because what we're also finding out from some of our other faculty here, we're finding out from other businesses, we have a program here called a capstone program, which integrates small businesses and students, seniors in the computer science and engineering. And what we've learned from that is what skills that a 4-year program doesn't teach that businesses require. And most of them are very targeted skills, like something like 4-year colleges don't teach iOS. NJIT has no Objective-C program on it. It will. I'm in the middle of developing one now, which should be rolled out in the fall. But there are a lot of very specific skills that the universities, colleges, even community colleges sometimes do not target that businesses are looking for. So I wouldn't tell you to not pursue a degree, a college degree, but as far as targeted training towards learning a skill which makes you employable on the WebMaster TNG, that particular program has been it's eligible for H-1B grant funding, which is a grant that we have here at NJIT, which will help people who fit the criteria and actually entering that program because it's targeted at putting people into jobs that people who are imported in this country to fill those jobs. And the training of webmasters in the new webmaster, which is HTML5, which dovetails very closely with mobile device development that we're doing in the other 2 classes. Very important skills and highly employable. So that's a very good question. I think it's a good program too. But you can also remember that the WebMaster series, that's a 6-month commitment, not just an 8-week one, which is still short by 4-year college standards, but it's a fairly intensive program which will demand that's the same type of 12 to 15 or more hours a week for straight through for 6 months. And Janine asks, does WebMaster TNG relate to iOS and Android app development? It relates to it in that not in the specific application development that we do that is specific to the clients that run on both the iPhone, iPad, or Android device, but it does relate to the actual browser-based stuff that we do. And since that the browser, like I said earlier, is probably becoming the operating system of the future, we think that the future of coding, especially a thing called cross-platform coding, where you can write one set of code and have it operate on diverse hardware and dissimilar hardware. That's probably where the future of the coding is. Now, client apps aren't going away anytime soon, but you can see that the trajectory and arc of development is trending more towards HTML5. HTML5 development can work on a mobile device, can work on a desktop computer, can work on a browser, and there's many components of development that can occur there. Like I said, that's not to say that the idea of having a client on your phone that does specific things is going to go away anytime soon. It certainly isn't. There will always be places for those kind of clients. And right now, between Apple and Android, there's probably about, I think they've crossed 1.1 million apps available between the iOS and Android. There still are more apps for iOS than there are for Android, but Android will be coming up very quickly. There's an awful big market in the Eastern Hemisphere of the world, and an awful lot of eyes over there. They're going to be looking at mobile devices, and they're going to need content. And whether it's client-based content that's specific to an Android device or an Apple device, or whether it's cross-platform HTML5-based content, there's going to be an awful lot to develop for them. I guess that covered your question in my typical long-winded way. I promise you in classes when I type in the forum, I type shorter answers. All right. Does anyone have anything else? We're about at our limit. We're approaching that quickly. So if anyone has anything else, please let me know now. All right. If you have any other questions, you can reach me at kellers@njit.edu, which we've got in the scrolling chat here. And this also, this is not only being broadcast on YouTube, but it's also being recorded. So after it's processed, it'll be available live if you need to go back and review anything. I want to thank you all for coming. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to tell you about what we're doing here at NJIT, what I'm doing in my classes specifically. So hopefully it inspires a few of you, and let's see. I hope, Kareem, you're welcome. I hope it inspires a few of you to actually pursue what you want to do here in iOS or Android, whether it's here at NJIT or in some other venue. Okay, thank you all.